Namaskar, hello and welcome viewers. You're watching this special presentation of Sansad TV, Bills and Insight, your one-stop destination for views, news and analysis of proposed legislations of India that have far-reaching implications and impact your life. I'm your host KRITI MISHRA, and today the spotlight is on the new SEZ legislation. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, while presenting the Union Budget for 2022-23, said that the Special Economic Zones Act will be replaced with a new legislation. Before the detailed analysis, let's take a look at the highlights. The new act will enable the states to become partners in development of enterprise and service hubs. The new legislation will cover all large and existing and new industrial enclaves to optimally utilize available infrastructure. The focus would be on enhancing competitiveness of Indian exports. So what are SEZs and why do we require a new law? A Special Economic Zone or SEZ is a specially marked territory or enclave within the national borders of a country that has more liberal economic laws than the rest of the country. India's SEZs were structured closely with China's successful model. An SEZ policy was announced for the very first time in 2000 in order to overcome the obstacles businesses faced. Parliament passed the Special Economic Zones Act in 2005 after many consultations and deliberations. The Act came into force along with the SEZ rules in 2006. However, these zones started losing their sheen after imposition of minimum alternate tax and introduction of sunset clause for removal of tax incentives. Currently, of the 425 notified SEZs, 268 are operational. The new legislation will help in addressing the pain points faced by India's SEZs to improve their performance. And joining us on the program for deeper insights on the proposed legislation and its impact, a very illustrious panel of guests. Joining us through virtual platform, Ms. Arpita Mukherjee, Professor, Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. Mr. P. Bhattacharya, Member of the Upper House. And Sandeep Aggarwal, Chairman, Industry Affairs Committee, PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I welcome all of you on Sansad Television, and also in the studio we have with us young and vibrant audience. And Mr. Aggarwal, let me begin the show with you. Achievement of $400 billion in merchandise exports represents a growth of over 21% in exports compared to the previous record high of $330 billion. SEZ exports, however, fell to $102.3 billion in financial year 21 from $112.3 billion in financial year 2020. Given the fact that the core objective of the SEZs is to propel exports, take us to the need to reform the law.
The law actually needs upgradation. And upgradation is a continuous process. So what we see, what we feel when we go for any changes or do any policy initiative, we find that there are ways and means to improve upon it. And Baba Kalyani Committee was formed just to make sure that this improvement does happen. And I believe there is scope of improvement in the labor laws for the SEZs, the land laws, the external infrastructure in the SEZs, the land lease, and even we believe the buildings should be there. There will be specialized organizations which should develop even the buildings and the land, and then only monthly lease money should be paid by the industry. This is really going to change, and this is what I believe the government will look into. The duties, the MAT, the state benefits are also an issue, that sometimes the benefits which are available to a normal unit in state are not available to companies in the SEZs. Single window clearance is still an issue. So we are looking at multiple minor irritants which are actually resulting in lower exports from SEZ. And I believe that SEZs will contribute a significant portion of the $1 trillion exports which the country believes that we can do in the next few years. And also there are environmental clearance issues still with the companies. So then is this selling to the domestic tariff areas? You know, when we are exporting, there are lean seasons and there are big, seasons when you can sell export. So during the lean seasons, it becomes imperative that the industry is able to sell to the domestic tariff area. So on an average or a last year's sales basis, the units should be allowed to sell in the domestic tariff areas at reduced duties. And I would say it should be the lowest duty which is available to any importer. Either it is from a FTA country, so in certain cases zero,
Right.
should be allowed to the companies from SEZ to sell into the domestic tariff area, or at least 50% duty should be charged. So
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid suggestion, sir. Think about other practices. Ms. Mukherjee, we will also undertake reforms in customs administration of SEZs, and it shall henceforth be fully IT driven and function on the customs national portal with a focus on higher facilitation and with only risk-based checks.
The most important thing why our SEZs were challenged in the WTO and why we lost the case was that the benefits given to SEZ was linked to net foreign exchange earning of the SEZ, which is a export-linked incentive, which is actually WTO non-compliant, as per the WTO subsidies and countervailing duty agreement. Now India will not be able to give direct subsidies. So the more important point is that which kind of indirect subsidies and ease of doing business can we do. If you look at countries like China, they actually use their SEZ as a test best of reform also. So if they wanted to reform the labor laws, or they want to bring in certain reforms in the retail sector, allow foreign investment in certain areas, they tried it within their SEZ. So the question is that can we, India, move into that kind of a model where the direct tax benefits have been challenged and we lost the case in the WTO, to a more ease of doing business kind of a framework,
Right.
which is not a direct tax benefit, but which also gives SEZ a level playing field. And Mr. Aggarwal rightly pointed out that today you are getting imports as zero duty through the FTA partner country. Why from a SEZ in India to a domestic area, tariff area, we are going to pay duty? So that is again another reform that we can think about.
Absolutely, absolutely. Bhattacharya, as Member of Parliament, you've been part of several deliberations. We also remember that a committee led by Bharat Fort Chairman Baba Kalyani had in 2019 suggested that SEZs should be converted into employment and economic enclaves. What are the anomalies to be corrected right now, sir?
Now, what I wanted to say, I had been to Mumbai and I have visited Jawaharlal Nehru, the port. That is the new port, not new port, but it's an old port. There's so many containers are there, and they have been saying that all the containers are coming from the different parts of the country, and from our country also they are exporting so many things from that port. My question is this: now the government has to be decided two things very clearly. One is this: one district, one product. Government thinking is this: from particularly that product will be export from that district to the other countries. This is one subject.
Yes, sir.
Another subject, government to decide whether they will open so many SEZ in different places in our country to export the different products. Now, to set up the SEZ is required so many things. One is this: what are the products you will produce in the SEZ? Now I come to that thing. In Bengal, I know there is near the Ganga River, there is one SEZ, and earlier they wanted to set up another SEZ at Holdia, but they have not cleared what product they will produce there and how they will export that.
Right, sir.
That the government to decide, or the investigation has to be made very clearly what are the items they wanted to export and what are the items they will produce in different places in SEZ. Otherwise, in stray action, building some sort of SEZ, that will not give any economic development in our country. That is my submission.
All right, so a very valid point that you're making, sir, is that the products have to be identified and then a proper policy and a program has to be framed. Of course, that should be taken into consideration while framing this new law. But Mr. Aggarwal, the government is also aiming at the success of Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiatives. And of course, that can be ensured with the effectiveness of a better implemented SEZ Act or scheme. What are the core expectations of the industry?
The investments in land and building are the most killing to an industry. And the foreign people who try to put in an investment in a country, they are more concerned with putting their machinery, equipment, and the technology to produce goods in the country. But it is not that they want to invest in land and building. So therefore, not only the land, even the building has to be on lease. That is the most important revolutionary step we wish the government to bring in. And also, as a Baba Kalyani report also has stated that there should be for equipment product exports, it should be different rules, but for services exports, you will require certain other types of benefits should be provided to the service exporters. So that is also needed to be looked into. But as a manufacturing side, because I am a cable manufacturer, so more from my experience from manufacturing, it is also required that even in SEZs, the services should be allowed. Right. And there should be, availability of urban amenities, even housing inside the SEZs should be allowed. And they should also be available on lease and rental, which is very easy. This is going to be a game changer, I believe, because nobody wants to do fixed investment into land and building, which they cannot pull out and take away if there is a problem in future. So we can have SEZs in every district for those specific products. And that could really increase the exports of such products.
And also ensure and further ensure ease of doing business in the country. But there's also a challenge of multiple models of economic zones. Ms. Mukherjee, we have SEZs, we have coastal economic zones, we have Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, National Investment and Manufacturing Zones, food parks, textile parks. Of course, now we have Gati Shakti in place. But do you think existence of multiple models could prove to be very complicated?
Multiple models exist in countries. Like, for example, I was listening to one district, one product. In China, what they did is they kept the SEZ or special zones for high-end electronics. Like when China was trying to attract companies into high-end electronics, telecom, consumer durables, they put them in the SEZ. At the same time, they did develop their own industry, textile and others, which is called the industrial cluster. So multiple models do exist, and China also has now made a Shanghai kind of services, kind of financial zones, and you can have multiple. So the one-liner is that there is possibility of having multiple models. Most countries have multiple models, and the multiple models are designed to suit the investor's interest. For example, if I want to source domestically and cater to a domestic market code, I would prefer an industrial cluster to a special economic zone. The purpose of the special economic zone is to really operate in the country, use the labor and other benefits, and export. The purpose of creating a zone is not to cater to the domestic market. However, unfortunately, with the pandemic, etc., when there is a supply chain disruptions, companies tend to also find a way out how they cater to the domestic market.
Absolutely.
There are now regarding the services component of the SEZ, because that was also raised that whether we have a services zone. There are many countries which have a service specific zones. Dubai is an example where you can have foreign education zones, you can have foreign healthcare zones. So, the beauty of service SEZ is that services is not challenged in the WTO. The discipline has not been developed, so you cannot challenge it in the WTO in terms of subsidy. So what they call it ki manpasand subsidy do, give whatever you want. So therefore
Right.
people go in for services zone. With servicification of manufacturing, countries give subsidies through the service channels to the manufacturing, like worker training, logistics, and therefore came the concept of free trade warehousing zones.
Absolutely. And with
really
1% subsidy, we can see the happiness on the face of Mr. Aggarwal. But moving on, in the past few years, Mr. Bhattacharya, many of the ASEAN countries have tweaked their policies to attract global players to invest into their SEZs and have also worked on developmental set of skilling their initiatives. Consequently, Indian SEZs also lost some of their competitive advantages globally. How do we regain that competitive advantage?
I am not going to compare my economic structure with the China, because our economy is completely based on the democratic setup, and their economy completely set up on the basis of the non-democratic, autocratic ideas and etc. So I don't like to compare this thing. You can say these things, okay, but the process, the way they are setting up the SEZ and the way they are producing the particular product, and that product they are trying to send it to different countries and export. But here we have the two pertinent points. One, whether SEZ product will come in our domestic market, or it will be restricted only the domestic market, and it will go only for the export. So if it is so, then we shall have to take up this matter carefully. What are the products we can send it to the other countries where we have the market? Some of the industries, suppose the agri-based industry, number one. Number two, agricultural product, particularly in the flower. I know in our country, in a different flowers, but in my state in West Bengal, I know the different types of flower in my state and the Maharashtra and other states also, they export it directly to the other countries. I know that some of the handicapped things are there, what they can do it directly. So in that case, if one district, one products, that concept is to be properly executed, then each and every district should have a separate, separate economic zone, I think.
Absolutely, sir. And now let's also take some questions from our audience here. Please go ahead, introduce yourself and speak your mind.
Central government is promoting SEZs and to bring FDIs and to promote employment. But on the other hand, state government is making laws for reservation of their local candidates. How does it create contradictory situations?
The point that you have raised, you have also answered the question. So you are saying that jobs are reserved for the local. Like when you go and build an SEZ, SEZs are often, large acres of land, built in remote areas. So when there is a large acre of land, building is happening, much of the labor force is expected to be local. If there is that it should be creating local employment. And generally, there has been a lot of problems in many states, even in West Bengal, there has been problems where there have been worry about local employment generation. Therefore, when you design an SEZ or give an SEZ, there are multiple things that has to be talked about, and everything is not in the law. You also have to meet the project viability. viability.
Absolutely,
And that is very
absolutely.
important, that the project has to be viable. In our case, if you see the numbers, many of these projects themselves have become non-viable. Like you are having SEZ which has been approved, yet there is not a single company, because if a single company is there, it will be an operational SEZ. So you have a right question to ask, that whether it will create employment. Yes, there are success stories of employment creation in certain sectors, but it is also very sectoral in case of India. Like IT sector, SEZs have created real employment. Gems and jewelry has created employment. These are examples from the past which you can see.
According to the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, around 40% of notified land for special economic zones are lying vacant, and more than 50% of land are non-operational. So my question is, how is this bill gonna help for the proper utilization of land for the special economic zones that are lying vacant and non-operational?
As we know, these special economic zones are contributing a lot towards environmental degradations and
Right.
creating pollutions, and it is leading to it is leading towards food insecurity, water insecurity, and it is not making any markable contribution towards agricultural sector. So what do you think that environmental law is playing any role regarding the regulations, productions, and setup of all these multinational companies?
All right, Mr. Aggarwal, two important points. What about better utilization of land? And secondly, more importantly rather, what about environmental concerns? Your take, sir.
Well, I would say one thing, I have a slightly different take. I would say that in all SEZs, the land adjoining every, institution, industry should be kept vacant for expansion, so that people know that they will not have to run hither or have to go to a different area to put in expansion plans. So the government should be keeping that land at least for the next 5 years, and even when it sells after 5 years or leases it out to somebody else, the right of first refusal should be given to the adjoining plots, companies, so that they should be able to expand. That becomes very important when a country is growing in exports like India. When we are trying to go for $1 trillion exports from a $400 billion, then the companies in our export processing zones will be keeping on requiring more land. But they would not want to invest into land and building today.
What about environmental concerns surrounding the SEZs?
That vacant land, absolutely vacant land. In the government file, there is a SEZ, but practically, totally, it has not yet been utilized properly, not yet been utilized. Some of the SEZs are there, where they are utilizing the government facilities, but the purpose of this SEZ not being served by them.
Absolutely. So we know that the government plans to unveil a new SEZ Act to make them engines of growth as well as compliant with the global trade norms. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Bhattacharya, Mr. Aggarwal, and Ms. Mukherjee. Next week, we'll return with incisive analysis of another important bill. Till then, take care and stay tuned to Sansad TV. Namaskar.